Now, when teachers hear that I have collected a list of something like 150 of these practical classroom techniques, they always say, "Oh, can I have the list?" And I say no. Why? Because teachers are like magpies. They love picking up shiny new ideas, trying it out once and going on to the next shiny new idea. I've lost track of the number of times I've talked about a particular technique and teachers have said to me, "Oh yeah, I used to do that, it was good. I used to do it and it was good, but something else came along, so I don't do it anymore." And that highlights the problem we have in teacher education. And that is that each new reform comes so fast on the heels of the previous one that it doesn't build on it, it just displaces it. And so what we need to do is to understand how hard it is to change practices in education and to give teachers time to consolidate one new idea before they're expected to take on another new idea. And so the idea, the model, if you like, that we've been developing is highlighted in slide 20. And we call it content then process. The idea is that you should attend to what it is you want teachers to help develop before you figure out how to do it. So I advocate that the content of teacher learning should be formative assessment. There isn't anything that research shows makes such a big difference to kids' learning. And so that is two parts. One is the evidence, the work that Paul Black and I did back in 1998 of drawing together all the research that shows that formative assessment has a huge impact on student learning. But then ideas, practical classroom techniques, like the 5 I've already showed you, to help teachers really do this in their own classrooms. But that's the easy bit. That's the bit that we basically figured out 10 years ago. My views about what makes a good classroom haven't changed in 10 years because teachers finding out where kids are in their learning, what to do next, that'll always be the essence of effective teaching. What we're beginning to understand is just how hard it is for teachers to change their practice. And we've developed a model, and we think this is actually pretty powerful, and it says that there are 5 essential components of teacher change. The 5 are choice, flexibility, small steps, accountability, and support. And we think that if any one of these is missing, the learning will be less effective. So I'll say a bit about each of these. First, choice. Why is choice so important? Well, back in 1980, a man called Meredith Belbin wrote a book called Management Teams, Why They Succeed or Fail. And the essence of his findings are shown in slide 22. He worked at Henley Management College, and he was involved in business training sessions. And what they found out was when people came from outside to do some business training, they were often given these group problems to solve. And when the people in the group were all of a very similar character, the group was usually less successful. But when people were very different, the group was more often successful. And Belbin realized that these people were actually carrying out different roles in the team. And he thought there were 8 in particular. And I'm not going to go through the whole list, but they're shown on the slide there. The point that he made that was really quite a radical breakthrough at the time in terms of management thinking was that each role has strengths and allowable weaknesses. So you might be very good at coming up with ideas, but you might not be very good at thinking through the consequences of those ideas. Now, in a weaknesses-based approach to professional development, what you say is, right, this person needs to be trained in how to be practical. But what businesses have discovered is actually focusing on people's strengths is better than focusing on their weaknesses. So if somebody's really good at having lots of ideas, then help them become even more creative and make sure they're partnered with somebody who is good at getting things finished off. And yet in teaching, we haven't learned that yet. We haven't learned that strengths are more important than weaknesses. So we, in professional development, focus on teachers' weaknesses. And I think there are some teachers whose weaknesses are so egregious they require immediate attention. But for most teachers, their students will benefit more from having that teacher become truly outstanding at the things they're already good at, rather than worrying too much about their weaknesses. So that's why choice is essential. Flexibility. Why is flexibility so important? Well, every teacher needs to take these ideas and make them work in their own classroom. People often say we need to focus on what works in education. And actually, what works is the wrong question, because everything works somewhere and nothing works everywhere. in order to implement reforms, it's much more than just taking words of wisdom from people like me and putting them into practice in your own classroom, because you have to modify them, you have to adapt them. As Herbert Ginsberg says, you need to morph them to make them work. So to make any idea that they've heard somebody else describe, to make any idea work in their own classroom, a teacher will need to change it. The danger, of course, is they change it so much it's no longer effective. So that's why our approach to flexibility is both tight and loose, and this is encapsulated in slide 24. So the 5 strategies of formative assessment: learning intentions, eliciting evidence, feedback that moves learning forward, students owning their own learning, and students as learning resources for one another. Those 5 things are always good things to be doing. But how you enact any of those in your own classroom is up to you. And only you know how to make these things work in your own classroom. And there's 2 reasons for that. First of all, nobody else knows as much about your classroom as you do, so you are in the best position. But the other thing I've discovered is if I tell teachers what to try, they'll come back and say, I did what you told me to do and it didn't work. So our experience is you have to give teachers choice and you have to give them flexibility to make them work. And each teacher will make them work in a different way. The nice part about that is that teachers make it better. So Charlotte Kerrigan, who, the English teacher I mentioned earlier, who was used to giving comments rather than grades, made it even better when she actually came up with this idea of match the comments to the essays. The key point here is that these techniques have to be feasible, relevant, and acceptable in the context of normal classroom practice. That way, teachers can adapt these techniques to make them work. Small steps. Why should you allow teachers to go slowly? I was interviewed by a journalist a few months ago, and she said to me, "Don't teachers resist change?" And I said, "No, I don't think so. I think teachers find change hard, but I don't think they resist change." And she said to me, "Why do teachers find change so hard then?" And I said, "It's because they're already experts in their own classroom." And this work has been developed in a very deep way by David Berliner, who's looked at expertise in teaching. And what he was surprised to discover was that expertise in teaching looks very similar to expertise in other domains like chess. And I'm not going to go through the whole list of the things that are shown in slide 26 there, but the important thing is that expertise comes from a large number of repetitions. It's very common to find that, that experts in chess, for example, have something like 65,000 chunks of arrangements of chess pieces that they've actually just learned as a result of playing a huge number of chess games. And in the same way, teachers are experts in what they do. Teachers are extraordinarily rapid at doing things like planning lessons. A novice teacher takes about 4 hours to plan an hour's student learning, and a novice teacher does it in less than 5 minutes. In other words, they do it 50 times faster. Why? How? Because they've done it so many times before. And so that's why small steps is so important. Pushing teachers to go faster than they're able to change means that you push them beyond their expertise, so they are no longer expert. And that's why they appear to resist, because they're saying, actually, this isn't as good. But if you allow teachers to go slowly enough to develop new expertise, then teachers can change. The important thing about expertise is that it can't be reduced to words. So much professional development over the past 20 to 30 years has focused on a problem in teachers that they don't know stuff. So most professional development has been designed as if teachers don't know stuff, and therefore we need to give them the answers. So we herd teachers into classrooms or auditoria, and we have experts supply the missing information, and we wonder why they're not getting any better. And the reason is because the diagnosis is incorrect. Teachers don't need new information, new knowledge. Take a classic piece of research on wait time. We know that the average wait time in classrooms is very short. Some studies find less than 1 second. And that students will learn more if the wait time is increased to 3 seconds. But what we also know is that teachers know this. I don't know a single teacher who doesn't know the research on wait time, and yet they don't do it in their own classroom. And the same is true in business. Many businesses know what they should be doing, they're just not doing it. So the problem is not one of lack of knowledge, it's turning into practice And that involves changing habits. And in particular, when you're changing habits, the hard bit is not getting new ideas into people's heads, it's getting the old ones out. And that's why it takes time. What we need to do is to create opportunities for teachers to work together, to share information, and to learn from mistakes. Now, I don't think it's good if teachers make the same mistake over and over again, but I also don't think there's any excuse for not making any mistakes at all. As Mario Andretti, the Formula One racing driver, used to say, if everything seems under control, you're not going fast enough, which is why I like Esther Dyson's phrase, always make new mistakes. Another way to think about this is Samuel Beckett's phrase from Worswood Ho, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. And I think as teachers, we should adopt that motto. We will fail as teachers because it's such a hard job. You show me a teacher who doesn't think they're failing, and I will show you a teacher with low expectations of her students. Our daily experience as teachers is a failure. As Doug Lamoff says, to a good teacher, no amount of success is enough. But the thing that we know that we can do as teachers is to bounce back and tomorrow try something different. Every day we know we can fail better than we did the day before. The crucial way of achieving this then is a combination of accountability and support. And the accountability picture seems to be very important. So we suggest that one way of doing this, particularly in small teacher groups, is to have a group of teachers where a teacher makes a commitment to a group of their peers through a process we call action planning. And we think this action planning process is very important because it forces the teachers to make their ideas concrete, and it creates a record. It makes the teacher accountable for trying a small number of things and for making those changes in their practice. And most importantly, it gives an opportunity for teachers to reflect on what am I going to do less of to make way. And if teachers don't do that, none of the rest is worth doing, because every teacher I know is working as hard as they can. So we can't make schools better by making teachers work harder. What we need to do is to take things off teachers' plates so they can actually begin to think about what they can do instead that'll be even better. And that's why this process of action planning is so important, because most teachers don't like saying that something they're doing could be dropped. Why? Because it's not about dropping bad things. Everything you currently do is good, but you can become an even better teacher by stopping doing good things to give yourself a chance to do something that's even better in the same amount of time. But to do that, you'll also need support. And that's why we think these teacher learning communities come into their own. So over the last 10 years now, my colleagues and I have established over 1,200 teacher learning communities in the United Kingdom, in America, and in Sweden. And here's what we've learned as a result of that experience. I can't guarantee this is the final word, but slide 32 is pretty much the summary of what we learned about the best way to establish these teacher learning communities. First of all, you need to get every single teacher to commit to the continual improvement of practice. And then you need to get them to focus on what will make a difference to kids. So no brain gym, no learning styles, there's not enough research evidence. Instead, it must be formative assessment or maybe one or two other things for which there is really strong research evidence. Leaders then need to clear the decks. They need to get all the other stuff out of the way to give time for teachers to focus on their own learning. So it's about keeping the focus on teacher learning, about keeping the focus on the things that make a difference, and then providing time, dispensation and support for learning and supporting risk-taking. Slide 33 summarises the practical details of what we learned about the best teacher learning communities. It needs to run for 2 years. 1 year isn't enough to bed these things in. The optimal size is 10 to 12. Smaller than that, there's not enough difference of opinion to get good discussions going. Larger than that, there's not enough time for everybody to be accountable for reporting back on what they've tried. We have no clear evidence about the best composition. Is it single subjects? Is it mixed? Should early years teachers be with upper junior schools or elementary schools? No, there's no evidence one way or the other. What is pretty clear is that the meetings need to be at least 75 minutes long, and they need to happen once a month. That seems to be pretty clear. 75 minutes is the minimum, and monthly is the optimum frequency. Less often than that, there's not enough momentum. More often than that, teachers haven't had a chance to try out new ideas. So monthly meetings of 75 minutes seems to be optimal. We suggest that every single meeting should have the same structure, which is shown in slide 34. Why have the same structure in every single meeting? Because when you have a repeated structure, the structure falls into the background and the learning itself comes into the foreground. If you change the structure for every meeting, teachers spend the first part of the meeting working out what they're meant to be doing. And so we see more learning when there's a common, agreed structure that people can operate within. Activity 1 is an introduction to the meeting. Activity 2 is a warm-up of some kind. Activity 3 is the active ingredient. It's the feedback session. Each person gives a succinct report about what they've tried in their classroom, how it went, and the job of everybody else is to help them do what they want to do. And you go around the whole group. It's not telling people what to do, it's about supporting each individual person in taking forward their own plans. Activity 4, to create some variety, is always a drip feed of new ideas. It could be a book study, like doing a chapter from a book each month, or watching some videos of people's classroom practice. The important idea is there's something novel at every meeting to provide something new and worth coming back for. Activity 5 is personal action planning. Each teacher sits down and plans carefully what they're going to do over the coming month. And in particular, if they're going to do some peer observations, they get their calendars out and they fix a time with a colleague. Because their experience is, if they haven't fixed a time by the time they walk out that meeting, it isn't going to happen. And then finally, on the wrap-up, activity 6, did we achieve our aims for this meeting? If yes, great. If no, what should we do about it? Now, of course, people worry about how do we train the leaders for these meetings? And my advice is don't. Slide 35 lists the things that I think are important that the leaders of this group are doing. But what we've discovered is that when there's somebody in the group who thinks they're an expert in formative assessment, they end up telling everybody else what to do, and there is invariably less teacher learning. This person is not meant to be the expert. They're just the person who keeps the meeting on track, makes sure there's a room booked, that there's refreshments. But their job is not to do the learning for other people, is to create a conducive environment for each person to get their own learning needs met. And finally, a quick word about peer observation. We think it's very valuable if peers watch each other and help each other improve, but we think it's very important this is not part of any formal performance management process. So the protocol that we've developed here is shown in slide 36. And the crucial thing is that it's the teacher being observed who owns the process. So if somebody comes into my classroom, I tell them what to look for. I say to them, I'm working on my wait time. Here's a stopwatch. So I give them a stopwatch and I ask them to measure my wait times. And here's the clincher. Any notes they make belong to me. Because when they're in my classroom, they're working for me. And when I'm in their classroom, I'm working for them. By signaling clearly that the person being observed owns the process, this marks out very clearly that this is not performance management, this is a genuine peer improvement process. When teachers engage in this process, 3 things happen. You get more student engagement, you get more student achievement, and perhaps most importantly, you get increased teacher satisfaction. Teachers say this is some of the most powerful professional development they've ever had. It makes teaching more fun. No teacher controls everything about the school context in which they work, about the lives of the young people that they work with. But the amazing thing about teaching is that each teacher controls everything they need to control to make a real difference in the lives of young people. Thank you.